Hi everyone, this is Erica from Gokce Capital. Today I'm going over episode 10 of our Gokce Investor Series. And this is the last episode in our mini-series on our end-to-end acquisition process. And today we'll go over notary closings. So in the last episode we went over title closing, just quickly reviewed title search and title insurance, and then when we decide to close with title and when we don't. And today we'll talk about our process when we close with the notary. So for most of our deals, we actually do close through a mobile notary and not through a title company. And generally, this is any deal with a price that is under $10,000. So because that's the majority of our closings, that would mean that almost all of them are done through a mobile notary. And I just want to make a note here for anyone listening. Again, a title company is generally recommended for closing. So if you are not using one, you do have to be very careful with your due diligence. Okay, so I'm just going to give a brief overview of our whole process end to end when we close with a notary. And this is after we have done all of our due diligence. So we've gone through all of the steps that we reviewed in our previous Investor Series videos, and now we're ready to close. So in the pre-closing process, we first run through everything, all the major points, including ownership and price and size, and double check that. And we do have a lot of checklists here. We believe in redundancy, but first we double check that the offer amount in the signed purchase agreement is the final offer amount, that it was not renegotiated one way or the other during the due diligence phase. We then make sure that we do have a copy of the vesting deed, whether that means going to the county for it or getting a copy from our seller. And we check the names in the vesting deed against the names of everyone who has signed the purchase agreement, just to make sure that all grantees have signed. Of course, there are instances where not all grantees can sign the purchase agreement, and we've gone over this in previous videos, but the most obvious scenario would be where one of the grantees has passed away. So in that case, we have already done our due diligence to make sure that the deed was a joint tenancy deed, and we just have the survivor sign the purchase agreement. We then also check the legal description in the vesting deed to see if it mentions the property size. And if it does, we double check that it's the same size as what is listed in the assessor's records. And again, we would have done this already in our due diligence stage, but because it's such a key element of the deal, we do a last check before the actual closing. So once we've done our final checks, we give the seller a call and we review the closing process. As I mentioned in the last video in some of our stories, it's really important to make sure that the seller actually understands what the closing process looks like. And it's also important to call them to simply confirm that they're still interested in selling. Again, I think we had one or two stories in the last video that showed, sometimes just because you have a signed purchase agreement doesn't mean that the closing is going to happen. We also, as we're reviewing the closing process, make sure that if there are multiple owners, that all owners are able to attend the closing. This is not always possible. In those cases, we try to work something else out. So maybe we have a couple, one, or if there are more than two signers, a couple of the signers go out and get the document notarized themselves, and then we have the mobile notary just go to meet with the final signer. And so once we've given the seller a call in and discussed the closing with them, we find a mobile notary, usually at 123notary.com, but there are a few other websites that you can go to find mobile notaries. We give the mobile notary a call, and we discuss the process with them, and we agree on a price. And then once everything's confirmed with the notary, we send the notary's information to the seller, letting them know that they should expect the notary to reach out. And we also send our seller's contact information to the notary, along with a review email that goes over the closing process. And then we put together the closing package. So we draft the deed and any required forms. In many counties, there is a form, something like an affidavit of property value, that also needs to be signed and notarized. And we include the deed, those required forms, the signed purchase agreement, and a return envelope in the closing package. We also have a closing checklist that we put in all our closing packages that we give to the notary, just to, again, remind them of the closing process. And then we'll go out and get a cashier's check. One thing I note here is we have a little mini checklist when we're getting a cashier's check. So we just confirm that the names on the cashier's check match the names on the deed before we seal the closing package. And we also check that the number in the cashier's check is the same as the number in the purchase agreement before we seal the package. So then we seal the package, mail it, and send the notary the tracking number. And yes, this all seems pretty simple, but I do just want to highlight the importance of having very clear checklists, especially what we found when we're doing a lot of these closings is maybe simple, but there are a number of steps, so sometimes things can slip through the cracks. But then at the closing, usually, hopefully it's smooth and we don't hear anything, but the notary will contact the seller and arrange a time and location for closing. The notary will then bring the hard copies of the documents and the cashier's check that we had sent them to the closing. The documents will be signed and notarized, and the notary will hand over the cashier's check. The notary will then send us scans of the notarized documents and drop the return package in the mail. So again, it's a pretty simple process, but as you've heard from some of our stories in our previous videos, just because it's simple doesn't mean that things won't go wrong. So it's always, reiterating again, it's always important to be very careful even when a process is simple. And also just a few additional notes. There are instances where the notary also needs to pick up hard copies of certain documents from the seller. Most often this is a death certificate that we need. So in those cases, we discuss this with the notary usually 2 or 3 times. So in our first phone call, in our follow-up email, and then just prior to the closing, just to make sure it is not forgotten. And it's also another key item that we discuss with the notary is just making sure that the notary is clear that we need a scan and not a photo of the notarized documents. That's been an issue sometimes. And I'll just end with a few stories here. So, first story, again, this shows how, even though a process is simple, things can always go wrong. So we recorded a deed, and this was it was a low value property. The property was under the seller's name in the assessor records, but the assessor gave us a call after the deed was recorded and told us that the property was actually held in a trust. So we had to go back and get the deed renotarized with our seller listed as the trustee. So this again highlights the risks that we take when we don't close with a title company, or really anyone would take if they don't close with a title company. And I think there are a few key takeaways here. So one, mistakes are fixable. It just takes extra time and money. And you also need to maintain a good relationship with your sellers. But also, it's very important to do thorough due diligence. Again, sometimes the process can seem simple, but you don't want to skip any steps and you want to be very thorough. So this was a case where it was early on. It was a property out in the middle of nowhere. And this may have been caught if we had been more thorough in searching through the whole chain of title and looking at all the deeds. Then we had another similar situation where we recorded the deed, and then the assessor let us know that the seller had actually changed her name twice in the chain of title, which meant we needed to go back and re-record the deed with a formerly known as in the deed and the list of the old names that she had taken title under previously. So again, this is also highlighting the risks you take if you don't close with a title company, because little things matter. It's if someone changes their name and their old name is on a deed, that old name does need to appear on the new deed. Otherwise, there could be a cloud on the title. So again, also important to be nice to your sellers at all times, because you never know when you may need to go back to them a few weeks later and ask them to redo notarization. Okay, so this concludes our mini-series on our end-to-end acquisition process. In our next couple of videos, we're going to start a new mini-series, and this is going to be a series on business strategy. So end-to-end business strategy, and that includes starting from the very beginning at forming your business, or how we formed our business and how we made decisions about what kind of business to form, through to sort of the administrative tasks of just maintaining a business. So taxes, incorporating all of that. And then again, I do like to highlight that if you are not familiar with us, you can check out our website at gokcecapital.com. That's GOKCE. And when you go to our website, you will see that we do have a number of promotions. We have a free land giveaway, a free vacation giveaway, and a free swag giveaway. And now we're also offering free 15-minute consultation calls. So if you'd like to schedule, send us an email at info@gokcecapital.com. Also, feel free to email us if you have any questions, or leave a comment in one of the Gokce Investor Series videos, and we'll answer the question in the next video. So thank you for listening, and more to come.